Welcome to Learning is the New Working. It's a podcast about the future of workplace learning and the people who are helping us get there. This is a special episode in a new format and a new season that marks our 12-month anniversary and about the 50th episode across 6 thematic seasons, each exploring different aspects of the future of learning and development. This season is a reflection on what we've learned on the series so far. We'll aim to tie together the ideas and concepts that we've explored through this crazy 12 months of reading, researching, presenting, podcasting, and of course, life after pandemic.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
Rahm Emanuel, Barack Obama's chief of staff, speaking to the Wall Street Journal in 2009, just after the 2008 financial crisis.
This is an opportunity. What used to be long-term problems, be they in the healthcare area, energy area, education area, fiscal area, tax area, regulatory reform area, things that we had postponed for too long that were long-term are now immediate and must be dealt with.
It's July of 2020, and when we started this podcast some 12 to 14 months ago, no one could have predicted what happened in these last 6 months. Which is kind of ironic since the topic of the podcast is in large part about the future of work and the future of the learning and development profession. A future that we all sensed at the time was going to be disruptive, changed inevitably by the trends in digital and other technologies, changed by demographics and socioeconomics, and even changed by climate. No way did we anticipate such an immediate, rapid, and comprehensively dramatic disruption. As things played out through this global pandemic and the response to COVID-19 in the last 4 months, things changed dramatically. As Satya Nadella, who's an important figure in our story, and we'll hear from him later, pointed out, over 2 years of digital transformation were accelerated into 2 months. The future of work is here, and it arrived clothed in the biggest economic, political, and healthcare crisis in the last 60 years. There is so much to be thought through and rebuilt as a result. The crisis laid bare almost every weakness in our economy and society, from the dysfunction of healthcare systems to the fragility of just-in-time supply chains, our reliance on paid gig workers, and the systematic injustice and racism here in America and indeed in many countries around the world. There's goodness come of this too, of course, a focus and a deeply connected response from our scientific community, the heroism of our healthcare workers, and a new definition of what essential work is. There's also a burst of innovation and creativity that's surely coming. Just watch what happens to the digital work, collaboration and communication experience once that artists, musicians, performers and poets turn their attention to these tools. But for us in the L&D space, there's much work to do. So as Rahm Emanuel put it, let's not let this crisis go to waste. Of course, no one can predict what will happen in the next 6 months, but there's a strong consensus that the world of work is never going to be the same again.
I don't think it ever goes back to the way it used to be. I think it will forever be altered. I think the question is just how much. And I think that's not just true for our industry. I think that's just true for life as we know it.
Kevin Oakes. He's the CEO of I4CP, an HR think tank here in Seattle, and also one of the best connected and most influential people that I know in the human capital and HR tech space.
I've been very heartened to see various CEOs come out and say, we're not going to do layoffs, right? I'm guaranteeing no layoffs. Or paying hourly workers, part-time workers, contractors even, So I think we are taking care of employees better today than we have in past downturns. Yet, you still have unemployment is going to skyrocket, and layoffs and furloughs and reductions in force are happening. And it's going to be a tough time for the next few months for these organizations. And I think this will really test the mettle of those organizations. And I think your employer brand will really get defined by what you do during this time period.
So there you have it. Not only is a crisis too good a thing to waste, but what you do now in this crisis is going to define your brand and the brand of your organization for years to come. That's an impressive call to action. I started Learning is the New Working podcast project about 14 months ago, when after 108 quarters in the software and training industry, I'd founded the Learning Futures Group and hung up my shingle as an independent investigator of the future of workplace learning. At the time, I felt a sense of personal frustration at the state of the industry. I felt that the training department was sliding into irrelevance somewhat, overwhelmed by the forces of digital transformation and the dark energies of the fourth industrial revolution. And also, we were hampered by outmoded thinking and tools. Even as industry leaders and governments were becoming more and more obsessed with skills and the skill shortage, I'd collected a whole bunch of data to illustrate that the L&D profession was in a deep malaise. And I felt so strongly that I took my case on the road. And I spoke to countless teams at symposia, conferences, meetups over the course of 2018 and 2019. Here's me making the case in London at the Learning Technologies Conference in February of 2020.
So I would put it to you that we're in the middle of a bit of a crisis in L&D, $240 billion business. And how many of you feel like we're really on top of the work that we have to do? How many people feel super confident that we can help our companies create value in the future?
Deathly silence. Not a single hand in the room went up. 600 silent head shakes and nods. And that's not an atypical response in the past when I laid out my thesis.
Okay, that's often the response that I get, and I'm a little bit worried about that. So I think the point that I want to make is that it feels like we're operating with processes and procedures and technology that is really grounded in the work of the 19th century. And we're facing challenges in the workplace today that are extraordinarily different from factories and piecework and the kind of environment that work was done when our discipline was first emerged.
You see, what struck me during the course of all this was the lack of pushback that I got from L&D teams. Everywhere there were nodding heads, maybe even the odd shrugging of shoulders and the prevailing sense that L&D was not having the impact that it actually should. Here's Mary Slaughter from Ernst & Young. She was a guest on my podcast, and I asked her how she felt about the future of learning and development.
At least up front, Chris, is that the opportunity has never been bigger because there is so much disruption in the world of work, and the half-life of one's skill set is getting shorter and shorter, smaller and smaller.
When I asked her what she thought were critical leadership skills for today's L&D business, she listed deep business understanding and a grasp of technology. But like me, she also had a slight sense of guilt, perhaps, about the lack of scientific rigor that we had to work with in the past.
And then this extra domain that is not one that I had, frankly, in my wheelhouse even 10 years ago was a deeper understanding of neuroscience and just the cognitive capacity in the brain and how information flows and how learning works or doesn't. I think once you sort of get a sense of the neuroscience component, you can probably look back like I have over your career and go, oh, well, I probably shouldn't have done that, but it seemed like the best idea.
Just last week, I spoke with another seasoned L&D leader, Julie Dervin from Cargill, who neatly summed up the need for a fresh approach.
It is a very exciting time for learning and development, and exciting in that we have the opportunity to play a very critical role for our organizations. And, I hear a lot of, from different teams, stress around, we can't keep up, and, what do we do with all these new technologies and, all of this stress and fear. But if we flip that around and put a frame on it that's about, excitement and possibility and the opportunity that we have to play a more critical role than we've ever been able to play for our organizations, and the direct connection to how we help keep our organization's skills competitive is so clear.
So smart learning leaders like Julie Dervin and Mary Slaughter recognize the shortcomings of our traditional operating style and perhaps the frustration that's been present in our teams for the last few years. But both of them have found smart ways to move forward and ways to inspire their teams to think differently.
But what it's going to take is that willingness to let go of being that, 2-decade professional that has been there, done that, seen everything, and being vulnerable and just learning with your team these new skills, these new technologies, being open to experiment, not knowing everything anymore, and just saying, well, let's try it and let's see what happens, and learning as you go, and just having fun with it. But I just think now more than ever, learning has such a clear, direct link to helping our organizations thrive.
But if we in learning and development had lost our collective sense of mission and were broadly frustrated at the outdated tool sets and lack of data-driven and science-driven techniques, the disruption of the last 6 months seems to have been a galvanizing call to action, and we found a renewed sense of purpose. Now is the time to turn frustration into action, to run bold experiments, to steal shamelessly from the science-based disciplines around us, and to build empathetic and learner-centric programs that leverage the best of technology that's available to us. And it's time to define solutions and approaches that will help us get to work on one of the defining problems of our time: how we help millions of adults build a new set of skills at speed and at scale to prepare them for the new world of work and the opportunities that surely lie ahead. The 2020 Workplace Learning Survey published by LinkedIn highlights a new optimism and focus for our community. It details continued and increased investment in L&D, that's good, a focus on building learning cultures, and a shift from a mindset of content-centric work to a focus on engagement, experiences, and building supportive learning cultures. At the same time, workers are hungry for more and voting with their feet. Engagement metrics are through the roof for resources such as LinkedIn Learning, edX, Class Central, and Babbel, organizations that we've got great insights from our podcast series over the last year. Microsoft too has just announced with characteristic boldness a thoughtful, data-driven and ambitious plan to reskill 25 million workers in future-oriented workplace skill. And it might be just in time for all concerned, especially the 40-plus million people here in the United States who find themselves without a job just 3 months after the lowest unemployment rate in American history. In the next episode, we're going to lay out a case for change based on the clues that I'd assembled last year and on conversations with an incredibly smart set of people who are practicing L&D with an eye to the future. We'll take a whistle-stop tour of the 4 industrial revolutions, just to set context, and we'll make the case for what needs to be done and how to think about the future. After that, we'll systematically document how we can move forward and what we can practically do to build a brighter future for our discipline. But let's close today with our baseline thesis. COVID-19 may have accelerated the fundamental change in how we work, but the core driver here, let's not forget, is technology